I paid for my son's wedding, but my deal humiliated me and my son asked me to leave. They forgot that I own their $348,000 house, and they owe me a $52,000 loan. The next day, I called my lawyer. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 60 years old, and for a long time, I believed there was no problem that couldn't be solved if a mother loved her child enough. Looking back now, I don't think that belief made me a better mother. I think it made me a very convenient one. I've been a widow for 8 years. My husband, Peter, died from a heart attack while he was away on a business trip. One phone call changed everything. One minute I was planning what we'd have for dinner when he got home, and the next I was sitting at my kitchen table with 2 police officers trying to explain a future I hadn't even imagined yet. People tell you time heals. It doesn't. You just get better at carrying the weight. After Peter passed away, our house became painfully quiet. There were no muddy shoes by the back door, no coffee mug waiting beside the sink, no voice asking me how my day had been. It was just me and my son Ethan. He was already an adult, but losing his father hit him hard too. We grieved differently. I cried when nobody was looking. Ethan threw himself into work, always chasing the next opportunity, always convinced he had to prove something. Maybe to himself, maybe to his dad, maybe both. From that point on, taking care of Ethan quietly became the center of my life. Not because he demanded it, because I wanted to. Saturday mornings usually looked the same. I'd wake up early, stop by the grocery store, and buy the things I knew Ethan liked, his favorite coffee beans. The frozen breakfast sandwiches he pretended were just for emergencies. The barbecue chips he'd always reach for before dinner, even though I told him they'd ruin his appetite. Every time I saw those things on the shelves, I'd smile. My cart slowly filled with groceries for someone who didn't even live with me anymore. Sometimes he'd stop by. Sometimes he wouldn't. If he called to say he was busy, I'd divide everything into containers and freeze it anyway. He'll eat it next week, I'd tell myself. It became a routine, one that made the house feel a little less empty. Friends occasionally asked why I still did so much for a grown man. I always laughed. Because he'll always be my kid. And I meant it. Ethan never acted spoiled. That's probably why it took me so long to notice the pattern. He never called and said, "Mom, I need money." He never walked through my front door with his hand out. Instead, he'd sit at my kitchen counter while I poured coffee. We'd talk about baseball, the weather, some movie he'd watched, his job. Then, somewhere in the conversation, his shoulders would sink just a little. He'd stare into his mug, and almost every time, the same sentence would come out. "Mom, can I run something by you?" Those words never sounded dramatic. They sounded casual, almost harmless. I'd set my coffee down and say, "Of course." Then he'd tell me something wasn't going the way he'd hoped. Maybe work had been slow. Maybe his car needed repairs. Maybe a business idea wasn't taking off. Maybe an unexpected bill had shown up. Nothing outrageous. Just life. I'd listen. Ask a few questions. Try to encourage him. Sometimes I'd even joke around until he smiled again. He rarely asked me for anything directly. Most of the time, he'd end the conversation with something like, "Don't worry, I'll figure it out." And I'd believe he meant it. The problem was, I never let him. I'd think about that conversation all night. I'd convince myself I was only giving him a little push, just enough to help him get back on his feet. A mother's job, right? That's what I told myself. Months turned into years, and our conversations settled into that same familiar rhythm. Coffee, small talk, a problem, then me trying to make it disappear. At the time, it felt normal. It felt like love. It wasn't until much later that I sat down and replayed those conversations in my head. Not one or two. Hundreds of them. And I realized something that somehow escaped me for years. Almost every meaningful conversation Ethan and I had started with exactly the same words. Mom, can I run something by you? I can still hear the way Ethan used to say it. Never loud, never dramatic, just casual enough that I didn't think much of it. Back then, it had only been about 2 years since Peter passed away. We were both still figuring out what life looked like without him. Ethan had left his stable office job because he wanted to start a small home renovation business with one of his friends. I remember how excited he was the day he told me. I know it's risky, he said with a grin, but Dad always said if you're going to bet on anyone, bet on yourself. Hearing Peter's words come out of Ethan's mouth almost made me cry. Instead, I smiled. I think he'd be proud of you. For a while, things seemed to be going well. Ethan was busy, sometimes too busy to come over for dinner. He'd send me pictures of kitchens they were remodeling or before and after shots of old decks they'd repaired. Whenever I texted him, he'd answer with something simple. Long day. I'll call you tomorrow. Business is picking up. I believed him. Then little things started changing. He still came by on Saturdays, but he looked exhausted. His smile didn't last as long. He'd stare at the coffee in his mug before saying much of anything. One morning, I asked, "You're sleeping okay?" He shrugged. Just a lot on my mind. What kind of a lot? The normal kind. He smiled, trying to make it sound lighter than it was. I didn't push. A few minutes later, there it was again. Mom, can I run something by you? I nodded. He explained that one of his biggest clients had delayed payment. It wasn't a disaster, just bad timing. Payroll was coming up, equipment needed repairs, and cash flow was tighter than he'd expected. He laughed halfway through explaining it. I guess nobody tells you this part when they say, be your own boss. You'll figure it out, I said. I always do. That was the end of the conversation. Or at least, it was supposed to be. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I wasn't worried because he'd asked for help. He hadn't. I was worried because he looked exactly like Peter used to look when he was carrying too much by himself. A few days later, I called him. How are things? They're getting there. You don't sound convinced. I'm just tired. There was a pause. Then he laughed. Mom, don't worry so much. Easy for him to say. A mother's imagination can create 100 problems from one tired voice. The following weekend, he came over again. I made pancakes. He barely touched them. That alone told me something wasn't right. Ethan. What? You've eaten 2 bites. I'm not that hungry. You've always been hungry. That finally made him laugh. I know. For a moment, it felt like old times. Then he leaned back in his chair. The truck needs repairs. I waited. And one supplier wants payment earlier than expected. Another pause. But I'll work it out. There it was again. No request, no hint. Just another problem placed gently on the table between us. After he left, I sat in the kitchen longer than usual. His coffee cup was still in the sink. Peter used to leave his there too. Maybe that's why I picked up my phone before I had time to talk myself out of it. Ethan? Hey, Mom. I've been thinking. Oh? Let me help. Silence. No. It doesn't have to be forever. I said no. You helped your father when he started his business. I'm not Dad. No? I said softly. You're my son. Another long pause. I'll pay you back. I didn't say it was a gift. I don't want people thinking I can't do this on my own. I don't care what people think. I do. I could hear the frustration in his voice, but underneath it, embarrassment, pride, the kind that makes accepting help harder than struggling. So I changed the conversation. I'll tell you what. What? If things improve next month, you can say no. And if they don't? You let me help this once. He sighed. You really don't give up. I've had 60 years of practice. That earned me another laugh. A real one this time. I'll think about it. 3 days later, he called me himself. His voice was quieter than usual. Mom. Yeah? If you're still offering, I am. I'll accept it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't tell him. I told you so. I simply asked, when can we sit down and go over everything? Because if I was going to help him, I wanted to do it the right way. I honestly believed we were solving a temporary problem. A few weeks passed. Business seemed calmer. Ethan sounded more relaxed. Then my cell phone rang while I was watering flowers in the backyard. The caller ID showed the name of a local bank. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Mrs. Monroe? Speaking. This is Karen from First Valley Bank. I'm calling regarding Ethan Monroe's account. Mrs. Monroe? Yes? This is Karen from First Valley Bank. I'm sorry to bother you, but your name was listed as an emergency contact on Ethan Monroe's business account. I tightened my grip on the watering hose. Is everything okay? There have been several missed payments connected to his business loan. We haven't been able to reach him consistently, so we wanted to verify his contact information. My stomach dropped. I'm not authorized to discuss account details, she continued, but I wanted you to know we're trying to get in touch with him. I understand. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. It stayed with me all day. That evening, I called Ethan. He answered on the third ring. Hey, Mom. Were you going to tell me? Tell you what? The bank called. He went quiet. I figured they might. Why didn't you say anything? I didn't want you worrying. I was already worrying. He sighed. Can we talk tomorrow? Of course. The next afternoon, he came over carrying a folder instead of his usual coffee. He looked exhausted. We sat at the kitchen table where we'd shared hundreds of conversations. This one felt different. He slid the folder toward me. I guess I should stop pretending everything's under control. Inside were invoices, loan statements, credit card balances, and repair estimates for his work truck. I turned the pages quietly. Individually, none of the numbers looked impossible. Together, they told a different story. The job slowed down, he admitted. My business partner left. He took some clients with him. I kept thinking one big contract would fix everything. Did it? He shook his head. No. The kitchen clock filled the silence. I failed, Mom. No. I did. You started a business. I buried it. That's not the same thing. He rubbed his face. I should have listened to Dad. What would he have said? Don't borrow tomorrow's money to solve today's problems. I smiled. That sounds exactly like him. I closed the folder. How much do you need to breathe again? His eyes narrowed. Mom. I'm asking. I don't want another rescue. This isn't about rescuing you. It feels like it. I don't want your business hanging over every conversation we have. I don't either. So let's deal with it. He looked frustrated. Pretend I say yes. What happens? I pay off the business loan. No. The car loan too. Mom. And you start over without wondering which bill will hit next. He leaned back. I can't let you spend that kind of money. You can. No. You can because I'm choosing to. His jaw tightened. I'll never be able to pay you back. I smiled. That's where you're wrong. I walked to Peter's old office and returned with a thin folder. I placed it in front of him. What's this? A loan agreement. He blinked. You already had one? I drafted it this morning. You planned this. I hoped I wouldn't need it. He opened the folder. The agreement was simple. It listed the amount I would lend him, basic repayment terms, and one condition. Payments would begin only after he was financially stable again. No impossible deadlines. No unreasonable interest. Just accountability. He looked up. I thought parents just gave money. Some do. I don't. He frowned. You don't? I want to help you. There's a difference. He stayed quiet. One day your business will recover, I said. I hope so. When it does, I want you to know you earned your way back. Not because I erased every consequence. He tapped the paperwork. So this protects you. It protects both of us. From what? Misunderstandings. He looked at me for another moment before picking up the pen. I never thought we'd need paperwork. Neither did I. But paperwork has a way of keeping families honest. He signed first. I signed second. When we were done, he laughed for the first time that afternoon. Mom. What? You're treating me like one of your clients. I laughed. If you were my client, I'd charge a much higher interest rate. He grinned. Now that sounds like my mother. I slipped the signed agreement into my desk drawer. At the time, it felt like nothing more than sensible paperwork between a mother and her son. The first payment Ethan made wasn't large. It didn't need to be. A week after we signed the loan agreement, he stopped by my house and handed me an envelope. I know it's not much, he said. Inside was a check. Just a few $100s. I smiled and pushed it back toward him. You know you don't have to start paying yet. I know. Then why now? He shrugged. Because I said I would. I took the check without another word. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the effort. For the first time in months, I saw something different in him. Not confidence exactly. Relief. His business wasn't suddenly thriving, but it had stopped falling apart. A few former clients came back. He landed a remodeling project for a local dentist's office, then another job through referrals. Nothing dramatic. Just steady progress. Whenever he stopped by, he looked less exhausted. His shoulders weren't so tense anymore. Even his laugh came easier. One Saturday, he walked into my kitchen and immediately reached for the refrigerator. Please tell me you still buy those breakfast sandwiches. I laughed. I've been buying them whether you show up or not. He grinned. I knew it. Some habits never changed. He made himself breakfast while I brewed coffee, and for nearly an hour we talked about everything except money. Sports. A movie we'd both watched. The neighbor who somehow managed to hit his own mailbox with his truck twice in 1 month. Ordinary conversations. I'd miss those. Eventually, our dinners became a routine. Every Wednesday evening, Ethan came over after work. Nothing fancy. Sometimes I cooked pasta. Sometimes we ordered pizza because neither of us felt like cooking. He'd help clear the table without me asking. Before leaving, he'd always check the porch light. Dad would have wanted you replacing that bulb by now. He'd joke if it looked dim. Little things. The kind people rarely notice until they're gone. One evening, he walked into the garage and found Peter's old toolbox sitting on the shelf. You never got rid of it? I couldn't. He picked up one of the worn screwdrivers and smiled. I still remember him teaching me how to use this. So do I. He carefully placed it back exactly where he'd found it. There was something comforting about watching him remember his father without either of us falling apart. Grief had become quieter. It still lived with us. It just didn't dominate every conversation anymore. Months passed like that. The loan agreement stayed in my desk drawer. Every now and then, Ethan would make another payment. Never late. Never with excuses. I updated the balance, filed the paperwork away, and we moved on with our lives. More importantly, our relationship finally felt balanced again. When he called, I didn't automatically brace myself for bad news. Sometimes he really was just calling to say hello. Mom, are you home? I usually am. I've got an extra hour. Thought I'd stop by. Those calls meant more to me than I ever admitted. For the first time since Peter died, I allowed myself to believe we'd found our new normal. Not perfect, but healthy. Ethan was standing on his own feet again. I wasn't constantly trying to catch him every time he stumbled. It felt peaceful. If you've ever watched someone you love slowly rebuild their life, you know those quiet stretches almost feel too good to trust. You start believing the hard part is finally over. One Wednesday evening, we finished dinner earlier than usual. I was wrapping leftovers while Ethan dried the dishes. He looked unusually distracted. Not worried, just somewhere else. I noticed him smiling at his phone more than once. "Everything okay?" I asked. He looked up. "Yeah." "You've smiled at that screen 3 times in 5 minutes. "I have?" "You definitely have." He laughed, slipped the phone into his pocket, then leaned against the counter. "I guess I should tell you." I waited. A small smile spread across his face. "Mom." "Yeah?" "I met someone." I smiled before I could stop myself. "Well, that's a pretty important detail to leave out." Ethan laughed. "I wanted to be sure before I told you." "How long have you been seeing her?" "A couple of months." "And you just now decided your mother deserved to know?" "I knew you'd ask a million questions." "I was going to ask at least 2 million. He shook his head. "Her name is Vanessa." "Tell me about Vanessa." He leaned against the counter and I noticed the smile that kept finding its way back to his face. "She's an event coordinator. Smart. Funny. And she doesn't scare easily." "Oh?" "She met me while one of my renovation projects was running behind schedule." "So she met you on a stressful day?" "Exactly. And she still called me back." I laughed. That already says something good about her. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa's name became part of almost every conversation. "We tried that little Italian place downtown. Vanessa says I work too much. Vanessa thinks you'd like this bakery." It was nice hearing my son excited about someone again. He sounded lighter, hopeful. One Sunday afternoon, he called. "Are you doing anything Friday?" "I don't think so." "I'd like you to meet her." "I'd love to." He paused for a second. "I've been nervous about this." "Why?" "I want the 2 most important women in my life to get along." I smiled. "That's a lot of pressure for your first introduction." "I know." Friday came faster than I expected. We met at a quiet restaurant that overlooked the river. Nothing fancy, just somewhere comfortable enough to have an actual conversation. I spotted Ethan first. Vanessa stood beside him as I walked up. She had a warm smile and confident eyes, the kind of person who seemed genuinely interested in whoever was speaking. "Mrs. Monroe?" "Rachel is fine." She smiled. "Only if you call me Vanessa." We hugged briefly before sitting down. The first few minutes were exactly what you'd expect. "Where did you grow up? What do you do for work? How long have you 2 known each other?" Nothing complicated. But Vanessa made conversation feel easy. She asked questions instead of waiting for her turn to talk. When I mentioned Peter, she didn't awkwardly change the subject. "I'm sorry you lost him," she said quietly. "Ethan talks about him a lot." "I hope that's a good thing." "It is." She smiled at Ethan. "He still asks himself what his dad would have done before making big decisions." I glanced at my son. He looked embarrassed. "I don't do it that often." Vanessa laughed. "You absolutely do." Watching them tease each other made me relax. There was an ease between them that couldn't be faked. As dinner went on, we talked about everything from travel to favorite movies. At one point, Vanessa mentioned growing up in a close-knit family. "My parents always believed people should show up for each other," she said. "I like that," I replied. "So do I." She stirred her iced tea before adding, "Families don't have to be perfect. They just have to know someone has their back." I nodded. I couldn't agree more. A little later, Ethan stepped away to take a phone call from one of his employees, leaving Vanessa and me alone for a few minutes. "I've heard so much about you," she said. "I hope only good things." She laughed. Mostly stories about your cooking. Mostly? And about how you've always supported Ethan. I shrugged. I've just tried to be his mom. She looked at me thoughtfully. I really admire families that stay close. So do I. My job lets me meet a lot of people, she continued. Some families barely speak to each other. That's sad. It is. She smiled again. I think people are lucky when they have someone they know they can count on. There was nothing forced about the conversation, nothing that made me uncomfortable. If anything, I found myself feeling relieved. When dinner ended, Ethan insisted on paying the bill before I could even reach for my purse. As we walked toward the parking lot, Vanessa gave me another quick hug. I'm really glad we finally met. So am I. She smiled warmly, then looked from me to Ethan. I hope we can all become one family. For the first time in years, I drove home believing the future might actually be kinder than the past. It didn't take long before having Ethan and Vanessa over for dinner became a regular thing. Some weeks it was Wednesday. Other times it was Sunday afternoon. There was no schedule. One of them would text. I'd check what was in my refrigerator. And somehow we'd end up around my dining table. I genuinely enjoyed it. Vanessa always offered to bring dessert even when I told her not to. If I show up empty-handed, my mother would never forgive me. She'd joke. One evening, she walked in carrying a homemade apple pie. I can't promise it'll be as good as yours. We'll let Ethan be the judge. He took one bite and grinned. I'm staying out of this. We all laughed. It felt easy, comfortable. Watching the two of them together made me think Peter would have liked her. She was organized, thoughtful, and quick to notice little things. If my glass was almost empty, she'd refill it before I even realized it. If I disappeared into the kitchen, she'd follow me to help without being asked. Those gestures mattered to me. They felt genuine. As the months passed, I slowly stopped thinking of her as Ethan's girlfriend. She simply became Vanessa, someone I expected to see sitting across from me at dinner. One Sunday, while we were clearing the plates, I asked Ethan, "How's that commercial project going?" Before he answered, Vanessa smiled. "They're making really good progress." I glanced at Ethan. He nodded. "Yeah, it's going well." I didn't think much of it. Later that evening, I asked him another question. "So, have you decided whether you're hiring another crew?" Vanessa answered first again. "We've talked about it." Ethan looked at her before adding, "Probably next month." It was subtle, almost invisible. The conversation kept moving, and nobody seemed uncomfortable. Still, I noticed. The next few dinners followed the same pattern. I'd ask Ethan something. Vanessa would respond first. Not because she was rude. Her tone was always warm. She never interrupted aggressively or tried to embarrass him. She simply filled the silence. Sometimes Ethan would add a sentence afterward. Sometimes he'd just nod in agreement. One evening, I smiled and asked, "Ethan, are you ever going to answer one of my questions before she does?" He laughed. "I guess she's just faster." Vanessa looked slightly embarrassed. "Oh no. I didn't even realize I was doing that." "You weren't hurting my feelings," I said. "I just noticed." She smiled apologetically. "I spend all day coordinating people at work. I think I accidentally carry that habit everywhere." "Occupational hazard?" "Exactly." We all laughed, and the moment passed. Or at least it seemed to. A few weeks later, Ethan mentioned they had started looking at neighborhoods where they'd eventually like to live. That caught my attention. "Really?" He nodded. "Nothing serious yet." I smiled. "Well, you've always talked about owning a place with a little backyard." Before Ethan could continue, Vanessa leaned forward. "We're trying not to plan too far ahead." "That makes sense," I said. She kept smiling. I've learned life usually works out better when you don't involve too many opinions. The comment wasn't harsh. If anything, she said it casually. But something about it made the conversation slow down for a second. I simply nodded. I suppose that's true. Then she changed the subject herself. So, Rachel, Ethan says you make the best peach cobbler. The conversation drifted somewhere lighter. Movies, vacation ideas, the unusually warm weather. Nothing felt openly wrong. Still, I found myself noticing that whenever I asked Ethan about his future, Vanessa gently redirected the conversation somewhere else, never abruptly, never awkwardly enough for anyone else to mention it. Just enough that the original topic quietly disappeared. By the end of the evening, we hugged goodbye like always. "Drive safe," I called as they walked to the car. "We will," Ethan replied. I stood on the porch until their taillights disappeared down the street. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Thanks for dinner, Mom." I smiled at the message. Then I realized something. For months, Ethan had always called me on the drive home. That night, he only sent a text. I smiled as the delivery guys carried the new refrigerator into Ethan's kitchen. "The old one was making that awful noise again," I said. Vanessa laughed. "I swear it sounded like it was trying to take off every time we opened the freezer." Ethan shook his head. "You really didn't have to do this, Mom." "I know." "Then why did you?" "Because I'd rather you spend your money growing your business than replacing appliances." He gave me a quick hug. "Thank you." It was genuine. At least it felt that way. Vanessa thanked me too. She even insisted I stay for coffee while the installers finished their work. For over an hour, we talked about movies, neighborhood restaurants, and a vacation they hoped to take someday. It felt normal. I drove home believing I'd helped make their week a little easier. A month later, Ethan's truck broke down outside a job site. He called while I was trimming roses in my front yard. "Mom? You sound stressed." "I am. The transmission finally gave out." "Can it be repaired?" "It can." He hesitated. "I just wasn't expecting the estimate." I asked how much. There was another pause before he answered. I could almost picture him staring at the repair invoice. "It's more than I have right now. You need the truck to work." "I know." Without thinking much about it, I paid the repair shop directly. When Ethan picked up the truck that evening, he called me. "It drives like new." "I'm glad." "I'll pay you back." "You can worry about that later." He thanked me several times before hanging up. I noticed something, though. That call lasted barely 5 minutes. Years earlier, we would have stayed on the phone another half hour talking about work, baseball, or whatever show we were both watching. Now, once the problem was solved, the conversation ended. I tried not to read too much into it. People get busy. Life changes. That's what I kept telling myself. The little favors continued over the next year. Sometimes it was groceries after Ethan landed between paychecks. Sometimes I covered a utility bill when an unexpected expense came up. One Christmas, I quietly replaced their aging washer and dryer because Vanessa had mentioned they leaked during every load. Neither of them ever demanded anything. That part is important. They never called saying, "Mom, send money." Instead, they'd tell me what was happening. I'd connect the dots myself. And before either of them asked, I'd already decided to help. Looking back, I realize I made those decisions so quickly that I never stopped to ask whether they actually needed rescuing, or whether I simply couldn't stand seeing Ethan struggle. One Saturday afternoon, I was organizing old family photos when my phone rang. "Ethan." I smiled before answering. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hey, Mom." His voice was upbeat. No stress, no exhaustion. We chatted about ordinary things for several minutes. His latest project, the weather, a neighbor who had accidentally backed into his mailbox. I remember thinking how nice it felt to have a conversation that wasn't about bills or repairs. Then his tone shifted ever so slightly. So, there it was. So? I wanted to ask your opinion about something. What is it? There was a brief pause before he answered. Mom, what do you think about me buying a house? Ethan didn't answer my question right away. Instead, he laughed quietly. I guess I should have started with the whole story. I was thinking the same thing. We met for lunch the following weekend. Vanessa joined us, carrying a folder stuffed with printed listings and mortgage estimates. The excitement on their faces reminded me of two kids planning their future. Vanessa spread everything across the table. We've been looking for months. Ethan pointed to one of the papers. The problem isn't the monthly payment. It's the down payment, Vanessa finished. And interest rates aren't helping. They had done their homework. Their credit had improved. Ethan's business was finally steady again. Vanessa had a good job. They weren't being irresponsible. They just weren't quite where they needed to be. We've talked to 2 lenders, Ethan explained. Both said the same thing. Wait another year. Vanessa tried to smile. They said we'd probably qualify if we kept saving. But renting another year feels like throwing money away. I listened more than I talked. That afternoon wasn't about convincing me to solve anything. In fact, neither of them asked. They simply explained where they stood. Driving home, I kept thinking about Peter. Whenever we faced a problem, he'd ask one question. Is there another way? By the time I pulled into my driveway, I already had an idea. I called Ethan that evening. Can you and Vanessa come over tomorrow? Everything okay? I think so. Curiosity brought them to my house the next afternoon. I had a notebook open on the dining room table. I've been thinking. Vanessa smiled. That's either very good or very expensive. I laughed. Maybe both. They exchanged a look. What if, I said carefully, I buy the townhouse myself? Neither of them spoke. You two live there. You pay rent, not market rent. Just enough to cover part of the expenses while you keep building your savings. Ethan stared at me. Mom, you'd have a stable place to live. No landlord raising the rent. No moving every year. And when you're ready financially, we can figure out the next step. Vanessa was the first to find her voice. You'd really do that? I can. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to decide today. He shook his head. I decided the second you finished talking. A few months later, I signed the closing papers. The townhouse cost just under $350,000. The mortgage stayed in my name. The title stayed in my name. That wasn't because I didn't trust Ethan. It was simply the cleanest way to handle everything until he was in a stronger financial position. We agreed on rent that was less than half of what similar homes were charging nearby. Just enough to create responsibility without making life harder. Neither Ethan nor Vanessa knew I had another plan. Every rent payment they sent me went into a separate savings account. I never touched it. In my mind, it wasn't income. It was a future gift. I imagined surprising them years later. Maybe when they had children. Maybe when they were finally ready to buy a place of their own. I'd hand them the account and say, you save this yourselves. I just kept it safe. That thought made me happier than I expected. Moving day felt like a celebration. Friends carried boxes. Vanessa organized everything with color-coded labels. Ethan spent half the afternoon trying to figure out where the couch should go. I mostly stayed out of the way, unpacking dishes whenever someone handed me a box. As the last truck pulled away, I handed Ethan the front door key. He looked around the living room, then back at me. For a second, neither of us spoke. He stepped forward and wrapped both arms around me. I don't know what I'd do without you. I hugged him back and smiled. One day, I said softly, I hope you won't have to find out. The townhouse slowly started looking like a real home, not just a place to sleep, a home. Every weekend there seemed to be another project. One Saturday we painted the living room. The next weekend, Ethan wanted to replace the old light fixtures. Vanessa spent hours comparing paint samples, holding little color cards against the walls while asking, "Too gray? Too blue?" I laughed. "They all look exactly the same to me." "They absolutely do not," she said, pretending to be offended. Ethan grinned. "Welcome to my life." Those were good days. We ordered pizza, argued over furniture placement, and ended every project more tired than we expected. Sometimes I'd bring over a pan of lasagna or a pot of soup because I knew they'd be too busy unpacking to cook. Other times I'd stop by with little things they hadn't thought about: a toolbox, new kitchen towels, a coffee maker after theirs suddenly quit working. Nothing extravagant, just the kind of things parents often do. Every time, Ethan would smile. "You always think of everything." "I've had more practice than you." Vanessa was always polite. She thanked me. She hugged me goodbye. She even texted me photos after they finished decorating a room. "Look what we finally got done." I'd smile every time my phone buzzed. It felt nice being included. As the months passed, though, I noticed tiny changes. Nothing dramatic. Just small moments that barely registered at first. One afternoon, I showed up with a few flower pots for the front porch. Vanessa admired them before saying with a laugh, "You're going to spoil us." "I don't mind." "I know." She hesitated. "We should probably learn to do more of this ourselves." I smiled. "You will." "Eventually." She smiled back. The conversation moved on. I didn't think twice about it. A week later, I offered to pay for a new dining table after theirs arrived damaged. Vanessa thanked me, but this time she added something else. "We're trying not to rely on you for every little thing." I waved the comment away. "You're just getting started. It's okay to accept help." She nodded. "I know." Looking back, I realized she wasn't refusing my kindness. She was trying to tell me something. I just wasn't listening. From my perspective, helping was normal. If I saw a problem I could solve, why wouldn't I? It never crossed my mind that constant help, even well-meaning help, could feel overwhelming to someone trying to build an independent life. Ethan never seemed uncomfortable, at least not openly. Whenever I asked if they needed anything, he'd usually shrug. "If you happen to see a good deal on patio furniture," or "We've been thinking about replacing the microwave." Little comments like that. I'd take them as invitations. Maybe they weren't. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Dinner together every week. Quick phone calls. Holiday plans. For the first time in years, I truly believed everything was falling into place. Then one Saturday morning, I baked blueberry muffins because Ethan had always loved them fresh from the oven. I packed a container, grabbed the spare house key they'd insisted I keep for emergencies, and drove over without calling first. I'd done it dozens of times before. I expected laughter, coffee, maybe another home project. Instead, the moment I stepped inside, both Ethan and Vanessa looked up at me. Neither of them smiled. The room suddenly felt much quieter than it should have. For a second, none of us said anything. I lifted the container of blueberry muffins with an awkward smile. "I thought I'd surprise you." Ethan recovered first. "Mom." "Hey." He walked over and gave me a quick hug, but it felt rushed. Not cold, just distracted. Only then did I notice there were 4 other people in the house. 2 couples about Ethan and Vanessa's age were sitting in the living room with coffee cups balanced on their knees. Someone had blueprints spread across the coffee table. Vanessa stood up immediately. "Rachel, hi. We weren't expecting anyone." Her smile was polite, but I could hear the surprise underneath it. "I can see that." One of the guests introduced himself. Another couple waved. Everyone was perfectly friendly. No one was rude. That almost made it harder to explain why I suddenly felt like I didn't belong. Vanessa accepted the muffins. These look amazing. Thank you. I figured everybody could have some. I'm sure they will. She glanced toward the living room. We're actually in the middle of planning something. Oh. It's nothing exciting, Ethan added quickly. Just helping some friends organize a charity event. I nodded. Sounds nice. No one told me to leave. No one made me feel unwelcome. But conversations have a rhythm, and I had interrupted theirs. People were waiting for me to decide whether I was staying or going. I made the decision for everyone. I won't keep you. You don't have to rush, Ethan said. Even as he said it, he looked relieved that I wasn't unpacking my purse or settling into a chair like I normally would. Vanessa walked me to the front door. Thank you again for bringing these. Of course. And, next time, just let us know you're coming. We would have planned around it. She said it gently, without accusation. I smiled. I probably should have. She touched my arm. We really do appreciate everything. I know. I meant it. Driving home, I kept replaying the afternoon. Objectively, nothing terrible had happened. My son hugged me. His friends were kind. Vanessa thanked me more than once. So why did I feel like I'd accidentally walked into someone else's house? I made myself a cup of tea and tried to shake it off. Young couples deserve privacy. They deserve weekends with friends. Not every Saturday has to include Mom. That was a reasonable thought. Still, it lingered longer than I expected. For years, I'd walked into Ethan's life without knocking. Back when he was a kid, that was normal. Even after he became an adult, he never seemed to mind. Maybe things had simply changed. Maybe I was the last person to notice. Around 8 that evening, my phone rang. It was Ethan. Hi, sweetheart. Hey, Mom. His voice carried the same hesitation I'd heard earlier. I wanted to make sure you got home okay. I did. There was a short pause. I also wanted to say, thanks for the muffins. I'm glad everybody liked them. They disappeared pretty fast. I smiled. That's always a good sign. Another pause. Long enough that I knew something else was coming. Mom. Yeah? I hope this doesn't come out the wrong way. You can tell me. He cleared his throat. Maybe next time. Just text first, okay? I didn't answer right away. I let Ethan's words settle instead of reacting to them. Maybe next time. Just text first, okay? He sounded nervous, like he'd been rehearsing the sentence for hours. I could have taken it personally. A part of me almost did. But another part remembered what it felt like to be newly married. To want a home that belonged to the two of you. To build routines without someone dropping in unexpectedly. You're right, I finally said. I should have called. The relief in his voice was immediate. Thank you for understanding. I'll text next time. I appreciate that, Mom. We talked for another few minutes about ordinary things before hanging up. Nothing dramatic, no argument, no hurt feelings spoken out loud. Just one small adjustment, and I told myself that's exactly what it was. An adjustment. The following weekend, I caught myself reaching for my car keys out of habit. Instead, I picked up my phone. Me. Hey, are you two around this afternoon? I baked too many cinnamon rolls. A few minutes later, Ethan replied. We'd love that. Come by around 3. Simple. Easy. When I arrived, Vanessa greeted me with a hug. I'm so glad you texted. I figured I should start practicing. She laughed. I think we're all still figuring this out. That answer stayed with me. Not because it was hurtful, because it sounded honest. Over the next several weeks, I changed little things without really thinking about them. I stopped buying household items unless they specifically mentioned needing something. I asked before bringing dinner over. If they said they already had plans, I wished them a good evening instead of trying another day. Oddly enough, the less I inserted myself into their routine, the more relaxed everyone seemed. Dinner conversations flowed more naturally. Vanessa talked more. She told me stories about work. She asked for one of Peter's old chili recipes after Ethan kept bragging about it. One evening we spent almost 20 minutes laughing because none of us could agree on how much garlic belonged in anything. It felt comfortable again. Not exactly the way it used to, but good in a different way. I even noticed Ethan looking less caught in the middle. Before, he'd constantly glance between Vanessa and me whenever conversations drifted into family decisions. Now he just talked, as if he no longer worried someone would feel left out. One afternoon, Vanessa surprised me. She called just to ask if I wanted to meet her for coffee. No errands, no emergencies, just coffee. "I've been wanting to spend time together," she said. "I feel like we've both been busy." We talked for almost 2 hours, mostly about ordinary life, books, travel, her parents in another state. At one point, she smiled and said, "I think we're finding our rhythm." I smiled back. "I think so too." Driving home that day, I felt lighter than I had in months. Maybe I'd been overthinking everything. Maybe the awkward afternoon with their friends had simply been one uncomfortable moment that all families go through. Relationships change. People grow. Sometimes parents have to grow too. I was finally beginning to believe we'd found a healthier balance. Not less love. Just different boundaries. A few weeks later, my phone buzzed while I was working in the garden. It was Ethan. "Hey, Mom. You sound happy?" "I am." "Good, I like hearing that." He laughed. "Are you free Friday night?" "I should be." "I want you to come over for dinner." "Just because?" "Just because." There was something in his voice I hadn't heard in a long time. Pure excitement. When I pulled into their driveway that Friday evening, Ethan opened the front door before I even reached the porch. He was grinning from ear to ear. "I've been waiting all day to tell you something." Ethan stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. The house smelled like roasted chicken and fresh bread. Vanessa was in the kitchen pretending to stir something on the stove, but I could tell she kept glancing toward the dining room every few seconds. "You two are acting strange," I said with a laugh. "What did I miss?" "Nothing," Ethan answered a little too quickly. "Dinner first." I raised an eyebrow. That wasn't suspicious at all. He grinned but didn't say another word. Dinner was wonderful. We talked about work, a neighbor's new puppy that barked at everything, and a movie Ethan insisted we all needed to watch. It was one of those evenings where conversation came easily. No awkward pauses, no tension, just family. I remember looking around the table and thinking how different everything felt compared to a few months earlier. Giving them space hadn't pushed us apart. If anything, it had brought us back together. When we finished eating, Vanessa started gathering plates. "I'll help," I said. She smiled. "No, stay right there." I laughed. Now I'm definitely suspicious. Ethan stood up. "So, there's actually a reason I invited you tonight." He reached into his pocket. For a split second, I honestly thought he was looking for his car keys. Instead, he pulled out a small black ring box. I covered my mouth before he even opened it. Vanessa froze. "Ethan." He walked over to her. "I've loved building this life with you. It's not perfect. It probably never will be. But I can't imagine doing any of it without you." He dropped to one knee. My eyes filled immediately. "Vanessa Caldwell?" She was already crying. "Will you marry me?" She laughed through the tears. "You haven't even let me answer." "I know. I'm nervous." She nodded over and over. "Yes. Of course, yes." The ring barely made it onto her finger before they hugged each other. I don't even remember standing up. One second I was watching them, The next, I had both of them wrapped in my arms. I'm so happy for you. Vanessa hugged me tightly. We're really doing this. You are. Ethan smiled at both of us. I wanted you here because you're family. Those words meant more to me than he probably realized. For the next hour, we talked about everything. Possible wedding dates, guest lists, whether they wanted a small ceremony or something bigger. Vanessa admitted she'd been collecting ideas for months, but hadn't wanted to assume anything before the proposal. Ethan laughed. She has an entire folder. It's color-coded, Vanessa said proudly. I believe it. At one point, Ethan looked at me. We're going to keep it reasonable. We don't want to go into debt over one day. I understood exactly what he meant. I also knew weddings had a way of becoming more expensive than anyone planned. Before I really thought it through, the words came out. I'd like to help. Both of them looked at me. You don't have to, Ethan said. I know I don't. I want to, Vanessa hesitated. Rachel, that's incredibly generous. You've got enough ahead of you. Let me take some of the pressure off. Ethan started to object again. I held up one hand. This isn't a loan. This is my gift to both of you. The room grew quiet. Finally, Vanessa smiled. Thank you. Ethan nodded. Thank you, Mom. We spent another hour talking about venues and photographers until none of us noticed how late it had become. Driving home, I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in years, it truly felt like our family wasn't recovering anymore. It was growing. The next morning, I sat down with my coffee and opened my laptop. Waiting at the top of my inbox was an email with the subject line, "Welcome to your wedding planning portal." It started with something so small I almost laughed it off. An email landed in my inbox while I was having my morning coffee. Invoice due, floral deposit. I opened it, looked over the numbers, and paid it before I even finished my first cup. Nothing unusual. That had become my role. The wedding planner would send me an invoice. I would review it, pay it, and send back a confirmation. Sometimes Ethan texted afterward. Thanks, Mom. Sometimes Vanessa did. We really appreciate this. Simple messages, always polite. For a while, that was enough. I genuinely enjoyed helping. After everything Ethan and I had been through over the years, watching him build a future felt worth every dollar. A week later, we toured another wedding venue together. Vanessa walked through the ballroom with the coordinator while Ethan followed beside her. I stayed a few steps behind. What do you think? Ethan asked. Before I could answer, Vanessa smiled at him. I love the windows. They're beautiful, Ethan agreed. The coordinator looked at me. And you, Rachel? I think it's lovely. Vanessa nodded politely. Yeah, I think we've already decided. It wasn't rude, not really. It was just fast. My opinion had been invited after the decision was already made. I brushed it aside. They were the ones getting married. Of course they should make the final choices. That was perfectly reasonable. The tasting appointment felt much the same. The chef placed several appetizers in front of us. Vanessa sampled each one carefully. I don't think my family would like this. This one needs more seasoning. Oh, Ethan, remember your cousin hates mushrooms? Everyone laughed. I laughed too. Then the chef looked at me. What about you? I smiled. I'll eat just about anything. He chuckled. That makes one of us. The conversation moved on before I could say another word. Again, it wasn't intentional. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. I was happy just sitting there watching them make plans together. That's what mothers were supposed to do eventually. Step back. Let them build something of their own. One afternoon, I stopped by the bakery after work to pick up cookies Ethan loved as a kid. I almost called to see if they wanted me to bring them over. Instead, I remembered our conversation months earlier. Text first. So I did. Made your favorite chocolate chip cookies. Can I stop by? Vanessa replied a few minutes later. We're meeting with vendors tonight, but thank you. Maybe another time. I smiled at my phone. See? I told myself. They're busy. Nothing personal. The wedding planning kept moving. Mine did too. Except I slowly realized something. The invoices always reached me. The conversations rarely did. One evening I mentioned a photographer I'd heard wonderful things about. Ethan looked surprised. Oh, we actually booked someone last week. You did? Yeah. I must have missed that. Vanessa answered quickly. We made the decision after one of our planning calls. Oh, didn't Ethan tell you? He looked embarrassed. I thought I had. It's all right, I said. And honestly, I believed it. People forget things. Planning a wedding is stressful. I refused to turn every little oversight into a personal insult. Still, those little moments started collecting, like pebbles in a pocket. Light enough to ignore one at a time. Heavy when you carried enough of them. Another invoice arrived. Then another. Lighting, music, decor, the honeymoon deposit. I paid each one. Every confirmation email ended with the same cheerful line. Thank you for your prompt payment. One afternoon, I called the wedding planner to ask a simple question about the guest seating. I just wanted to check whether Ethan's aunt and uncle are sitting together. The planner sounded distracted. Let me see. I heard papers shuffling. Then she suddenly stopped. Oh, what is it? I'm sorry. For what? She hesitated just long enough to make me curious. I probably shouldn't have said anything. I laughed softly. You've already started. She sounded genuinely apologetic. Vanessa asked us not to bother you with the planning details anymore. I frowned. What do you mean? Only regarding decisions. I stayed quiet. She continued carefully. She said if we needed approvals, we'd contact them. And if we needed payments... Another pause. We should contact you. There wasn't any cruelty in her voice. She was simply explaining the instructions she'd been given. I see. I'm so sorry if I overstepped. No, I answered gently. You didn't. We just follow whatever the couple requests. I understand. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my laptop. There was another invoice waiting in my inbox. I opened it, read through every line, clicked pay now like I always did. Then I closed the computer. No tears, no anger. Just a strange emptiness I couldn't quite name. For the first time since the engagement, I found myself wondering whether I was still helping plan my son's wedding, or simply financing it. I decided to stop pushing myself into the planning, not because anyone had asked me to, because I kept telling myself this was what healthy parents were supposed to do. Young couples deserved the chance to build their wedding their way. Maybe I had simply forgotten what that looked like. So I changed. When invoices arrived, I paid them. When someone needed a signature, I signed it. When Ethan or Vanessa asked a question, I answered it. But I stopped offering suggestions. No more venue ideas. No more recommendations for photographers or florists. No more articles I'd stumbled across about wedding timelines. I quietly stepped back. Oddly enough, nobody seemed to notice. Or if they did, nobody mentioned it. The messages kept coming. The caterer needs the second payment. Can you review this contract? The decorator needs approval before Friday. I handled each one the same way, quickly, without making it a conversation. I noticed something else around that time. Ethan stopped calling just to hear my voice. For years, we'd talked about everything. A funny customer he'd met, a baseball game, something he'd fixed around the house. Even if the conversation lasted only 10 minutes, we always found something to laugh about. Now my phone lit up with messages that sounded more like reminders than conversations. Mom, did you get the invoice? Mom, can you send the confirmation receipt? Mom, the planner needs your email. Every text had a purpose. Once that purpose was finished, so was the conversation. One Saturday morning, I sent him a picture of the tomato plants growing in my backyard. He'd helped me plant them years ago. Look who's finally growing tomatoes without your help. He answered almost 3 hours later. Looks good. That was it. No joke. No follow-up. No. Save me a few. I stared at the screen for a second before putting my phone down. People get busy, I reminded myself. He's planning a wedding. He's running a business. Life changes. Still, I couldn't ignore the difference. A few evenings later, I called him instead. He answered quickly. Hey, Mom. Am I catching you at a bad time? I've only got a minute. I just wanted to see how you're doing. I'm good. How's work? Busy. How's Vanessa? Good. There wasn't any tension, just short answers. I smiled anyway. All right. I won't keep you. Thanks, Mom. I'll call you later this week. Sounds good. He never did. I didn't bring it up. What would have been the point? A week later, another invoice appeared. I paid it. Then the planner emailed asking if I'd received confirmation. I replied yes. 5 minutes later, Vanessa sent me a thumbs-up emoji. That tiny little icon somehow replaced conversations we'd once had for half an hour. One afternoon, I ran into Ethan at a hardware store completely by accident. He looked genuinely happy to see me. Mom! He hugged me. For a moment, everything felt normal again. We wandered through the paint aisle talking about lawn equipment and a leaking kitchen faucet. Nothing important. Nothing about the wedding. I loved every minute of it. As we walked toward the checkout, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. I've got to run. No problem. He smiled. I'll see you soon. I'd like that. He hurried toward the parking lot. I watched him leave, realizing that 20 minutes in a hardware store had been our longest personal conversation in weeks. That thought stayed with me longer than I expected. I started wondering if I was adjusting to their new life, or quietly disappearing from it. I never asked. I didn't want to become the mother who demanded attention. One evening, while organizing receipts in my office, I noticed something odd. The planner had forwarded several updated schedules. One line caught my eye. Final food tasting. Completed. Completed? I frowned. I opened the attachment again. The date was 3 days earlier. I checked my calendar. Nothing. No invitation. No email. No text. I read the schedule one more time just to make sure I hadn't missed something. I hadn't. The final tasting had already happened, and no one had thought to tell me. The first thing I told myself was simple. Don't make this bigger than it is. People forget. Wedding schedules change. Maybe they honestly thought I was busy. By the time I saw Ethan a few days later, I'd already decided not to turn it into an argument. We met for coffee near his office. He looked tired but excited, the way people often do when they're counting down to their wedding day. He hugged me as soon as I walked in. Thanks for meeting me, Mom. Of course. For a while, we talked about ordinary things, his latest project at work, the weather, a neighbor who'd somehow managed to park across 2 spaces. It felt nice, normal. When our drinks arrived, I finally smiled and asked, almost casually, So, how is the final food tasting? His hand stopped halfway to his coffee cup. The tasting? Yeah. I saw it on the updated schedule. A flicker of guilt crossed his face. Oh, I'm sorry. It all came together really fast. The venue had one opening. They called us the day before. I should have told you. His apology sounded sincere. I believe that part. I smiled. It's all right. I was just curious. Before he could say anything else, Vanessa returned from the counter with a couple of pastries. What are we talking about? The tasting, Ethan answered. She looked at me with an apologetic smile. Oh, Rachel, honestly, we were trying to make things easier for you. Easier? You've already done so much. We figured you didn't need another afternoon of sitting through menu samples. She laughed softly. It can actually be pretty exhausting. I nodded. I've heard. We just wanted to reduce your stress. Her explanation sounded perfectly reasonable, thoughtful even. Anyone listening from another table probably would have thought she was being considerate. I appreciate that, I said. And the food? She brightened immediately. It was wonderful. We made a few last-minute changes. The salmon was better than the chicken. We switched desserts, too. She listed several decisions I'd never heard about before. I simply listened. Every choice had already been made. Every discussion had already happened. I was hearing the summary instead of being part of the conversation. Again. The rest of lunch stayed pleasant. We laughed, talked about honeymoon ideas, argued playfully over whether Ethan would survive an international flight without losing his passport. It wasn't uncomfortable, just different. As we stood in the parking lot, Ethan hugged me again. Thanks for understanding. I always do, I answered. His smile lingered for a second before Vanessa called him over. I'll see you this weekend. You will. I walked toward my car feeling strangely calm, not hurt, not angry, just aware. There was a pattern forming. Nobody excluded me with dramatic speeches. Nobody told me to stay away. Instead, decisions quietly happened first, and explanations arrived afterward. Always afterward. I was beginning to understand the role I'd been given. Not partner, not planner. Certainly not decision-maker. Just the person who needed to know enough to keep everything moving. As I reached my car, I realized I'd left my sunglasses on the cafe table. I turned around and walked back toward the entrance. They were standing only a few feet away, talking quietly. Neither of them had noticed me. Vanessa let out a small breath and smiled. I'm glad she didn't make this complicated. Ethan didn't answer right away. He just nodded once. I stopped before they could see me, waited a couple of seconds, then walked in through the other entrance as though I'd never heard a thing. My phone started ringing more often. Not from Ethan, not from Vanessa, from the wedding planner. Hi, Rachel. I'm sorry to bother you again. No problem. What's going on? The venue needs the next payment before Friday. I'll take care of it. Sometimes it was the florist, sometimes the decorator, sometimes the travel agency handling the honeymoon reservations. Before long, people I'd never met knew exactly who to call whenever something needed to be paid. One afternoon, the planner actually laughed during our conversation. I have to admit, you're the easiest client I've ever worked with. I don't think I'm the client. There was a brief silence. Then she chuckled awkwardly. I guess, technically you're not. But we both knew what she meant. The decisions came from the couple. The payments came from me. That had quietly become the system. I kept every receipt in a folder inside my home office. Venue, catering, music, photography, decor, transportation, the honeymoon deposit. Every invoice had a confirmation attached. Peter had always believed in keeping records. You never regret good paperwork, he'd say. I could almost hear his voice every time I filed another receipt away. One Saturday, I met Ethan to sign a final authorization for one of the larger payments. He looked excited. The ballroom is going to look incredible. I'm sure it will. They're adding this new lighting package. I saw the estimate. It's expensive. I smiled. Weddings usually are. He rubbed the back of his neck. I still can't believe you're doing all this. I want to. And I meant it. I really did. Watching him build a family still brought me genuine joy. That part hadn't changed. But something else had. As we left the venue, several vendors stopped Ethan to ask quick questions. He answered each one confidently. Nobody looked at me, which made perfect sense. It wasn't my wedding. Then the planner hurried over. "Rachel." She was holding another clipboard. "I'm so sorry. We have one more invoice that needs approval." She handed it directly to me without even glancing at Ethan. He stood there quietly while I reviewed the paperwork. For a strange moment, it felt as though we were attending two different events. He was the groom. I was the accounting department. Driving home, I laughed at myself for even thinking that. Maybe I was being oversensitive. Maybe this was simply how weddings worked when parents helped financially. Still, the thought stayed with me. I began asking myself a question I'd never seriously considered before. Had I helped so much that everyone, including me, had forgotten where the line was? Helping had always come naturally. If Ethan struggled, I stepped in. If something broke, I fixed it. If there was a problem, I looked for a solution. I'd spent years believing that was what a good mother did. But somewhere along the way, had helping quietly become my only role? I didn't know. And honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. That evening, I cooked a simple dinner and settled into my favorite chair with a book. For the first time in weeks, the house was completely quiet. No emails, no invoices, no planner, no vendors, just silence. It felt nice. Around 8 o'clock, my phone rang. "Ethan." I smiled before answering. "Hey, sweetheart." "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded upbeat. I leaned back, already looking forward to hearing about work or the honeymoon or maybe nothing important at all. "How's your evening?" "Good. I was actually just thinking about you." "Really?" "Yeah." I waited. He hesitated for a second. "So, there's something I wanted to ask you." I smiled to myself. "Of course. What is it?" "The honeymoon package changed, and we're going to need to talk about the budget one more time." I was hoping you'd say that. Ethan sounded relieved before I'd even finished answering. "How much are we talking about?" "There was a price increase on the honeymoon package, and..." He hesitated. "We upgraded the room." I smiled. "Was that Vanessa's idea?" He laughed. "It was both of us." "Of course it was." He told me about the ocean view, the extra nights, and how they didn't want to regret cutting corners on something they'd only do once. Listening to him reminded me of the little boy who used to get excited about every family vacation. I couldn't bring myself to say no. "If it's within reason," I said, "I'll cover the difference." "Really?" "Yes." "Thank you, Mom. I appreciate everything you've done." "I know you do." At least, I wanted to believe he did. We talked for another minute before hanging up. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and walked into my office. The planner had already emailed the updated invoice. I paid it. Then, almost without thinking, I opened the drawer where I kept all my financial records. The folders had become surprisingly thick. Wedding, townhouse, loan agreement, home repairs, medical bills, business expenses. I pulled everything onto the desk. At first, I was only looking for one receipt. Instead, I found myself adding numbers: the business loan, the car loan, the townhouse down payment. Years of charging Ethan well below market rent, furniture, appliances, emergency repairs, the wedding deposits, the honeymoon, small things I'd forgotten, large things I never could. I reached for my calculator, then stopped. "No," I whispered to myself. "That can't be right." I checked the numbers again. Slower this time. Nothing had been entered incorrectly. The total was simply larger than I'd ever allowed myself to notice. Not because I'd hidden it, because I'd never added it all together. Every expense had always made sense by itself. A refrigerator when theirs stopped working, a truck repair so Ethan wouldn't lose jobs, a security deposit, a mortgage payment during a slow month. One wedding invoice, then another. None of those decisions had felt unreasonable on the day I made them. Together, they told a different story. I leaned back in my chair and looked around Peter's old office. His framed photograph still sat on the bookshelf. Sometimes I caught myself asking what he would have thought. He'd always been more cautious than I was. Not less generous, just more willing to ask difficult questions. Questions I'd spent years avoiding. Had I ever actually said no? I tried to remember. I thought about every late-night phone call, every unexpected visit, every conversation that started with a problem. Every time I'd told myself, "It's only this once." I frowned, because it almost never was. One favor became another. One emergency led to the next. One payment made the following payment easier to ask for. Not because Ethan was manipulative, at least I didn't believe he was. It had simply become our normal. He struggled. I solved it. Neither of us questioned the pattern. For the first time, I wondered whether I'd helped him, or quietly taught him that I always would. That thought stayed with me for the rest of the evening. It wasn't regret. If I could go back, I still would have helped my son. Every single time. But maybe I should have paid more attention to how often helping had become expected instead of appreciated. A few days later, I found a large cream-colored envelope in my mailbox. Elegant lettering. Heavy cardstock. My heart lifted immediately. The wedding invitations had finally arrived. I carried it inside, smiling before I even broke the seal. I held the wedding invitation in both hands longer than I probably should have. The envelope was thick, the paper expensive, and every detail looked beautiful. Vanessa had always loved elegant designs, so none of it surprised me. I smiled before I even opened it. This was the invitation I'd been waiting for. My son's wedding. I carefully unfolded each page, reading every line the way mothers do, making sure I didn't miss a single detail. The ceremony, the reception, the schedule, the names of the bridal party. I found Ethan's name, Vanessa's, her parents, the officiant. Then I reached the section introducing the family. I read it twice, then a third time. My name wasn't there. Not as Ethan's mother, not as a host, not even in the acknowledgments. For a moment, I wondered if another insert had slipped onto the floor. I looked inside the envelope again. Nothing. I quietly laughed at myself. You're overthinking this, Rachel. Wedding planners make mistakes. Someone probably copied the wrong version before sending it to print. That had to be it. I set the invitation on the table and poured myself another cup of coffee. The disappointment lingered for a few minutes, but I refused to let it grow. It wasn't about me. It was Ethan and Vanessa's day. That thought became my favorite sentence over the next few weeks. Whenever something felt a little strange, I repeated it. It's their day. When I wasn't asked to review the final menu. It's their day. When the florist called only to confirm another payment. It's their day. When everyone else seemed to know updates before I did. It's their day. The words became surprisingly easy to say, harder to believe. A few days later, Ethan stopped by to pick up a check for one of the remaining vendor balances. He looked exhausted. Everything okay? I asked. He nodded immediately. Just wedding stuff. I remember planning mine. It can wear people out. He smiled. I honestly can't wait until it's over. I laughed. I don't think many grooms admit that. I'll be happy once we're married. The planning is the stressful part. I handed him the envelope. He thanked me, hugged me, and checked his phone before he even reached the front door. Work, wedding messages, friends. His attention seemed to belong everywhere at once. I almost mentioned the invitation. Almost. Instead, I said, Don't forget to eat something today. He laughed. You sound exactly like Mom. I am Mom. Fair point. He left smiling. So did I, at least until the driveway was empty. One evening, my neighbor Linda came over for tea. She had watched Ethan grow up and knew almost every chapter of our family. Are you excited? She asked. I am. You've been working hard on that wedding. I've mostly been writing checks lately. She gave me a knowing smile. That counts too. I shrugged. They're young. If I can make their lives easier, why wouldn't I? Linda stirred her tea without saying anything for a moment. Then she looked at me. Just promise me you're letting yourself enjoy it too. I am. Good. She studied my face. You hesitated. I smiled quickly. I guess I'm still adjusting to not being involved in every little decision. That's normal. I know. And they're building their own family now. I know. Saying it out loud helped more than I expected. By the time Linda left, I genuinely felt lighter. Maybe I'd been reading too much into little things. Families change. Children grow up. That wasn't rejection. That was life. The following week, I spent an afternoon wrapping one of their wedding gifts. As I tied the ribbon, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the wedding planner. The subject line read, "Final seating layout for review." I assumed it had been sent to everyone involved. Curious, I opened the attachment. A detailed floor plan filled my screen. Round tables, guest names, family sections, reserved seating. I leaned a little closer, searching for where I'd be sitting. I zoomed in on the seating chart, expecting to find my name somewhere near the front. Parents were usually seated close to the dance floor or beside immediate family. Instead, I found my name at table 14. I frowned. Maybe I had opened an old draft. I checked the date. Final version. I searched again, slower this time. Table 14 was near the back of the reception hall, close to the side entrance where the catering staff would be moving in and out throughout the evening. It didn't make sense. I looked for Ethan's table. He and Vanessa would be at the sweetheart table, of course. Vanessa's parents were at table 1. Her grandparents were at table 2. Ethan's cousins were scattered between tables 3 and 5. Even his college roommate was seated closer than I was. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the screen. Then I convinced myself there had to be a mistake. The wedding planner answered on the second ring. Hi, Rachel. Is everything okay? I just had a quick question about the seating chart. Of course. I noticed I'm assigned to table 14. A short pause. Yes. I was wondering if that might be a typo. Another pause. This one lasted just long enough to make my stomach tighten. No, Mrs. Monroe. Her voice stayed gentle. That seating arrangement was approved by Ethan and Vanessa. I didn't respond right away. She quickly added, We made a few revisions based on their final guest list. I see. I hope that's all right. I forced a small laugh. Oh, it's perfectly fine. We just wanted to follow their preferences. I understand. She thanked me for calling, and we ended the conversation a few moments later. I placed my phone on the kitchen counter and stood there without moving. The house was completely quiet. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Mostly confused. I kept asking myself the same question. Why? If they wanted me farther back for some practical reason, they could have simply told me. Instead, I had learned about it by opening a seating chart. I walked back to my computer and looked again. Maybe I had overlooked something. Maybe there was another Monroe family table. There wasn't. Several of Ethan's cousins, people he only saw a few times a year, were sitting closer to the front than I was. Friends from work, neighbors, college buddies, people who had known him for a fraction of his life. I quietly closed the file. Then I repeated the words that had carried me through the past several months. It's their day. I said them once, then again. This time they didn't bring the same comfort. That evening, Ethan called. For a brief moment, I considered mentioning the seating chart. Instead, I asked how he was holding up. Tired, he admitted with a laugh, but excited. I can imagine. We're almost there. I'm proud of you. Thanks, Mom. He sounded distracted. I could hear people talking in the background. Vanessa was saying something I couldn't quite make out. I should get back, he said. Lots to finish. Of course. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow. The call ended. Neither of us mentioned the seating chart. Neither of us mentioned the invitation. Neither of us mentioned anything that felt uncomfortable. Maybe that was easier for both of us. The evening before the wedding, I opened the hall closet and reached for a small wooden box I had tucked away months earlier. Inside was the last gift I had planned to give them. Not the wedding payment. Not the honeymoon deposit. This one was personal. Peter had bought the box years before he passed away. Inside it, I had carefully placed the deed information for the townhouse, copies of every rental payment I had quietly set aside instead of spending, and a handwritten letter explaining why. My plan had always been simple. One day, when Ethan and Vanessa were truly ready, I wanted to surprise them with everything I had been saving for their future. I rested my hand on the lid for a long moment before closing it again. Tomorrow finally felt like the right time. I carried the wooden box into the living room and set it on the coffee table. Morning light spilled across the lid, catching the tiny scratches Peter had left on it years ago. I'd thought about replacing it once, but I never could. Some things didn't need to look new to be valuable. I opened the box one more time. Inside was a simple envelope. No stacks of cash, no flashy presentation. Just paperwork that meant far more than anyone could guess. Over the past few years, Ethan had faithfully paid rent for the townhouse. What he never knew was that I had barely touched that money. After paying property taxes, insurance, and maintenance, I quietly transferred the remaining rent into a separate savings account, month after month, year after year. It wasn't an investment for me. It was for him. My plan had always been to return every dollar when the time felt right. His wedding seemed like the perfect moment, a fresh start, a gift that could help them build a future instead of simply paying for one day. I unfolded the latest bank statement. The balance made me smile. It had grown into far more than Ethan would ever expect. No one knew the account existed. Not Ethan, not Vanessa. Not even my financial advisor knew why I insisted on keeping it separate. Whenever anyone asked why I hadn't increased my retirement spending, I simply smiled and changed the subject. This was my surprise. Peter would have loved it. I could almost hear him teasing me. You always did like planning 3 steps ahead. He wasn't wrong. I slipped the statement back into the envelope along with a handwritten letter. The letter wasn't long. I told Ethan how proud I was of the man he'd become. I told Vanessa I was grateful she had become part of our family. Then I explained the account. I wrote that every rent payment they thought had disappeared into my pocket had actually been waiting for this day. I hoped it would become the beginning of their own savings, maybe even the down payment on a home they truly owned one day. At the bottom, I signed it the way I always had. Love, Mom. I read the letter once before sealing the envelope. No edits. It said exactly what I wanted. The envelope fit neatly inside the wooden box beside copies of the account records. I wrapped everything in dark blue paper and tied it with a silver ribbon. Nothing extravagant, just elegant. Exactly the way I liked it. As I finished, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Vanessa. Looking forward to tomorrow. Thank you again for everything you've done for us. I smiled. I wouldn't miss it for the world. A few seconds later, she replied with a heart emoji. That tiny message softened the disappointment I'd been carrying since the seating chart. Maybe I had been letting small things grow larger than they deserved. Weddings were stressful. People forgot things, made rushed decisions. None of that erased years of love. Before going to bed, I placed the wrapped gift by the front door so I wouldn't forget it in the morning. I checked my dress one last time, hung my coat beside it, set my shoes underneath. For the first time in weeks, I let myself imagine the day ahead, watching Ethan get married, meeting relatives, sharing dinner, laughing, and, after the reception was over, handing him the one gift no one saw coming. I turned off the lights and headed upstairs. Sleep came slowly, not because I was worried, because I was excited. When my alarm sounded a few hours later, I opened my eyes before it rang a second time. Outside my bedroom window, the sun was just beginning to rise. It was finally here. My son's wedding day. I arrived at the venue nearly an hour before the ceremony. That had always been my habit. If someone needed help setting up flowers, carrying boxes, greeting vendors, or solving a last-minute problem, I wanted to be there before the chaos started. The wrapped gift rested carefully in the back seat of my car. I picked it up, took a slow breath, and walked inside. The ballroom looked beautiful. Everything we had spent months planning had finally come together. The flowers, the lighting, the soft music drifting through the lobby. For a moment, I forgot every uncomfortable feeling from the past few weeks. I was simply a proud mother. A young man wearing a staff badge approached me with a friendly smile. "Good morning. Welcome." "Good morning. Are you here for the Monroe Caldwell wedding?" "I am." He glanced at the clipboard in his hands. "The guest lounge is just through those doors." I smiled politely. "Actually, I came a little early in case anyone needed help." "Oh." He looked apologetic. "I think everything's already covered. I don't mind checking with the planner. I can radio someone if you'd like." "That would be wonderful." A few minutes later, another coordinator arrived. She smiled warmly but looked at me with the same expression. Professional, polite, completely unfamiliar. "Good morning." "Good morning." I was wondering if there was anything I could do before the ceremony starts. She shook her head. "Everything's on schedule." "Really?" "Yes, thankfully." She glanced toward the lounge. "If you'd like, you can relax with the other guests until we're ready." The other guests. I thanked her anyway. None of it was her fault. She simply didn't know who I was. As I walked toward the lounge, I couldn't help noticing how many people seemed busy around me. Photographers, florists, musicians, servers. Everyone had a job. Mine, apparently, was simply to wait. Inside the lounge, guests chatted over coffee and pastries. A woman about my age smiled and motioned toward the empty chair beside her. "Please sit." "Thank you. I'm Carol. Rachel." "Which side are you with?" "My son is the groom." "Oh." She looked genuinely surprised. "I thought you might be one of Vanessa's relatives." I laughed softly. "No. I'm Ethan's mother." Her eyebrows lifted. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be. I just assumed—" She stopped herself. "It happens." We ended up talking for almost 20 minutes. She was kind and easy to chat with. When her husband joined us, he smiled and asked, "So how do you know the happy couple?" Before Carol could answer, I said, "I'm Ethan's mom." His face changed instantly. "Oh. I didn't realize." "It seems to be today's theme," I joked. We all laughed, though mine probably sounded weaker than theirs. A little later, I walked into the hallway to stretch my legs. I spotted the wedding planner giving instructions to several staff members. She saw me immediately. "Rachel, you made it." "I did." "Everything looks wonderful." "Thank you." "You've all worked incredibly hard." She smiled. "We're excited." For just a second, I thought she might ask if there was anything I needed. Instead, she checked her watch. I have to run. The bridal party is almost ready. Of course. Before leaving, she added, guests will be seated in about 15 minutes. Guests? Again. I watched her disappear around the corner. A few moments later, I saw Ethan walking with two groomsmen toward another room. He looked handsome, confident, older than I remembered. I almost called his name. Before I could, someone stopped him to fix his tie. Another person handed him paperwork. Then a photographer pulled him toward a window for pictures. He never looked in my direction. I smiled anyway. He had enough on his mind today. The ceremony itself was beautiful. When Ethan saw Vanessa walking down the aisle, his eyes filled with tears. Mine did too. Watching your child promise the rest of his life to someone else is a strange feeling. You feel proud, grateful, a little nostalgic, and quietly aware that another chapter has closed. After they were pronounced husband and wife, the guests applauded. Everyone stood. People hugged each other. The newlyweds disappeared for portraits while the rest of us were guided toward the reception area. I picked up my wrapped gift and carried it with me. The photographer's assistants began organizing family members near a floral backdrop. Someone called out, "Immediate family first!" I instinctively stepped closer. Vanessa's parents walked into place. Her grandparents followed. Brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles. The photographer looked over the list in his hand. Then he called another group forward. No one said my name. I stayed where I was for another moment, still holding the gift, waiting to hear it. It never came. I stayed where I was for another minute, convinced I'd simply missed my cue. The photographer kept calling names. Bridesmaids, groomsmen, college friends, cousins from the Caldwell family. Groups came and went. People laughed as flashes filled the room. Someone adjusted a veil. Someone straightened a tie. The line kept moving. I wasn't called once. I looked toward Ethan. He was smiling for the camera, then turning to greet another relative before being guided into the next pose. He looked busy. Not careless. Just busy. I told myself there was a difference. A photographer's assistant walked past carrying another clipboard. I caught her attention. "Excuse me." "Yes, ma'am?" "I think I may have been missed." She looked down at the list. "What's your name?" "Rachel Monroe." She scanned the page carefully, then looked back at me with an uncertain expression. "I don't have you on the scheduled family portraits." "Oh. I can check if you'd like?" Before I could answer, another staff member called her name. "I'll be right back." She hurried away. She never came back. I stood there holding the wrapped gift against my side while another round of photos began. Nobody noticed. Or maybe everyone assumed I was exactly where I belonged. Off to the side. One of Ethan's cousins wandered over carrying a drink. "Hi, Aunt Rachel." He gave me a quick hug. "Great wedding, huh?" "It really is." "You getting your picture taken too?" "I think they're almost finished." He looked toward the photographer. "They've been taking pictures forever." "They have." He laughed and headed back toward the crowd before I could say anything else. A few minutes later, Ethan finally spotted me. His eyes widened slightly. He walked over as quickly as he could, though someone stopped him twice along the way. "Mom?" He hugged me quickly. "I'm so glad you made it." "I wouldn't have missed it." He pulled back and glanced over his shoulder. "I've been getting pulled in 10 different directions." "I can see that." "I'm sorry." "For what?" "If things feel chaotic." I smiled. "Weddings usually are." He looked relieved. "I'll come find you during the reception, okay?" "Whenever you have time." "I promise." Someone called his name. "Ethan." He looked back toward me. "I have to go." "I know. I'll find you." "You don't have to worry about me." He squeezed my shoulder once before jogging back toward the photographer. I watched him disappear into another group photo. That conversation lasted less than a minute. It was the only private conversation we had all afternoon. I found a quiet chair near the edge of the lobby and sat down. Guests drifted past in small groups. Everyone seemed to know where they were supposed to be. I wasn't entirely sure where I fit anymore. For years I'd imagined this day, not because I expected attention. I never needed that. I simply assumed I'd be included. Not as the person paying invoices, not as another guest wearing a name tag, as Ethan's mother, the title that had shaped most of my adult life. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, wandered over while chasing her cousin. She stopped in front of me. "I like your dress." I smiled. "Thank you. Are you family?" "I am." "Whose grandma are you?" I laughed. "I'm not a grandma." She thought about that for a second. "Oh." Then she pointed toward Ethan. "Are you his aunt?" For just a heartbeat I couldn't answer. "No. I'm his mom." Her eyes grew wide. "Really?" "Really." Before she could ask anything else, her mother hurried over. "I'm so sorry. She asks everyone questions." "It's perfectly all right." The little girl waved before running off again. I watched her disappear into the crowd. Children never meant to be unkind. They simply repeated what the room around them suggested. And today, apparently, nothing about me suggested mother of the groom. I adjusted the ribbon on the wrapped gift resting beside my chair. I still believed Ethan. He said he'd find me. He probably would. The reception hadn't even started yet. There was still plenty of time. The ballroom doors remained closed while staff made their final preparations. Guests slowly gathered outside, chatting and laughing. The excitement in the hallway grew louder by the minute. Then the master of ceremonies stepped onto a small platform near the entrance and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience." The conversations around me faded. "We're ready to welcome everyone into the ballroom." He smiled broadly. "Please make your way to your assigned tables. Dinner service will begin shortly." I looked down at the seating card still tucked inside my purse. Table 14. The ballroom buzzed with conversation, but somehow my table felt strangely quiet. I found the little card with my name on it at table 14 and sat down with the wrapped gift resting beside my chair. It wasn't a bad table. Everyone around me smiled politely, introduced themselves, and talked about the weather, work, and how beautiful the venue looked. They were kind, just not familiar. Across the room, I watched Ethan move from table to table, laughing with friends from college, co-workers, and Vanessa's relatives. Every few minutes, someone stopped him for another hug or another photo. I kept telling myself that this was normal. It was his wedding. Of course, he couldn't spend the whole evening with me. A woman sitting next to me leaned over. "So, how do you know the bride and groom?" I smiled automatically. "I'm Ethan's mother." Her eyes widened. "Oh, I thought you were one of the extended relatives." She looked genuinely embarrassed. "I'm so sorry." I laughed softly. "It's okay." And it was. Or at least I wanted it to be. Dinner was served, conversations continued, and I noticed something I hadn't expected. Every few minutes, people would stand up, walk across the room, and greet someone they knew. Nobody came to my table looking for me. Nobody stopped to ask if I needed anything. It wasn't intentional. That almost made it harder. Being forgotten rarely looks dramatic. Sometimes it just looks ordinary. I watched Vanessa's parents surrounded by cousins and lifelong friends. Ethan looked comfortable beside them, fitting naturally into every conversation. Seeing him happy should have been enough. Part of me believed it was. Another part quietly wondered when I had stopped fitting into that picture. I reached down and touched the wrapped gift beside my chair. Inside wasn't cash. It wasn't another check. It was the account I'd quietly built over the past few years. Every month, Ethan paid rent for the townhouse. I had deposited most of it into that account instead of spending it. I wanted to surprise him one day. Maybe when he and Vanessa wanted children. Maybe when they were ready to buy a permanent home. It represented years of planning, years of believing that helping now could become security later. No one at this wedding knew it existed. I hadn't even told my financial advisor who the beneficiary was. I smiled to myself. Maybe I'd give it to them tonight after everything settled down. Not during the speeches, not during dinner, just privately. That felt right. The music softened as the servers cleared the plates. Guests started settling into their seats again. One of the men at my table leaned toward me. "I've heard the groom's speech is supposed to be really emotional." "I've heard that too," I answered. Inside, I felt a tiny spark of excitement. Maybe Ethan would mention our journey. Not because I wanted attention, just because we'd survived so much together. His father leaving, the years of working 2 jobs, his depression, the long nights when neither of us knew if life would ever feel normal again. Those memories belonged to both of us. The ballroom lights dimmed another shade. A spotlight found the dance floor. I caught Ethan's eye for just a second across the room. He smiled. I smiled back. For a brief moment, everything else disappeared. Maybe I'd been overthinking everything these past few months. Maybe all the awkward moments had simply been the chaos of planning a wedding. Families made mistakes. People got busy. That didn't automatically mean love had disappeared. If you've ever convinced yourself to ignore a small hurt because you didn't want to ruin someone else's happy day, you probably know exactly what I was feeling in that moment. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage with a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us tonight." The room slowly fell silent. "We'd like to invite the bride and groom to share a few words before we continue the celebration." Applause filled the ballroom. Ethan reached for Vanessa's hand as they walked toward the stage together. Without thinking, I rested one hand on the wrapped gift beside my chair. I told myself I'd wait. Whatever happened during the speeches, I'd give it to them afterward. Vanessa smiled as she stepped up to the microphone, one hand wrapped around Ethan's. The room immediately quieted. She looked genuinely happy, the kind of happiness that made everyone else smile with her. "I just want to start by saying thank you," she said. "Today wouldn't have been possible without everyone in this room." Applause filled the ballroom. She thanked the wedding planner, the photographers, the catering staff, and the friends who had helped during the months leading up to the wedding. Then she turned toward her parents. "My mom and dad have always shown me what a strong marriage looks like. Thank you for loving me the way you always have." Her father wiped at his eyes. Her mother reached for his hand. It was a beautiful moment. Vanessa continued, thanking bridesmaids, groomsmen, grandparents, cousins, and friends who had traveled from different states. I listened carefully, not because I expected anything, just because I wanted to hear it. Maybe my name would come later. Maybe she had saved family for the end. I glanced toward Ethan. He smiled proudly as she spoke. For the first time that evening, I felt myself relax. Maybe I had spent months reading too much into little things. Maybe weddings simply had a way of making everyone stressed and distracted. Maybe this speech would wash all of those doubts away. Vanessa took a slow breath before speaking again. "I've also learned something important while planning this wedding." Her voice became calmer, more thoughtful. "I think love isn't only about finding the right person." She looked at Ethan. "It's also about building a life together." People nodded around the room. Several guests smiled. It was the kind of advice you hear at weddings all the time. Then she continued, "And building a life together sometimes means making difficult choices." The room grew quieter. "It means learning to make decisions as a couple." Another pause. "It means protecting your peace." I noticed a few people stop eating. The servers quietly stepped away from the tables. Vanessa wasn't reading from note cards anymore. She was speaking from memory. And sometimes, she said carefully, the hardest part of marriage isn't outside pressure. She squeezed Ethan's hand. It's learning how to create healthy boundaries with the people who love us the most. Something inside me shifted. Just a little. I sat a little straighter. Maybe it wasn't about me. Lots of couples talked about boundaries. It was a common subject. I told myself not to assume anything. Vanessa smiled again, but this smile felt different. It can be uncomfortable. It can even hurt people. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. Several guests exchanged quick glances. A woman at the next table looked toward another guest with slightly raised eyebrows. Nobody spoke. Vanessa continued. When people love you, they sometimes want to stay involved in every part of your life. She laughed softly. And they usually mean well. A few scattered chuckles came from the room. I didn't laugh. Neither did the people sitting closest to me. My fingers tightened around the edge of the gift box beneath the table. Ethan still hadn't spoken. He simply stood beside her, listening, agreeing with small nods every so often. I searched his face, hoping he'd look over at me. He didn't. Vanessa looked across the ballroom as if speaking to everyone equally. I hope every newly married couple gives themselves permission to build their own home, without guilt. The silence in the room felt heavier now. Not awkward. Just attentive. People were listening differently. I could feel it. The gentleman sitting across from me slowly lowered his fork. Someone behind me cleared their throat. I suddenly became very aware of how still I was sitting. The wrapped gift beside my chair suddenly felt much heavier than it had a few minutes earlier. Vanessa smiled one more time. Then she said, clearly enough for every guest in the ballroom to hear, because sometimes the people who help you the most are also the ones you eventually have to keep at a distance. The room fell completely silent. The silence lasted only a few seconds. Then someone started clapping. A few others joined in. Within moments, the entire ballroom was applauding. It wasn't loud because people were excited. It was the kind of applause people give when they're not entirely sure how to respond. Vanessa smiled, thanked everyone again, and stepped back from the microphone. The band quietly began playing soft music. Conversations slowly returned, but they sounded different now. Lower, more cautious. I stayed exactly where I was. My hands rested in my lap. The wrapped gift was still leaning against my chair. For a moment, I wondered if I had misunderstood everything. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. Maybe those words weren't about me at all. Then I noticed something. People weren't looking at the stage anymore. They were looking at me. Not everyone. Just enough. A woman at the neighboring table glanced toward me, then quickly looked away when our eyes met. Two men near the dance floor exchanged a few quiet words before one of them subtly nodded in my direction. Nobody was laughing. Nobody was pointing. It was somehow worse than that. It felt like they had all reached the same conclusion without saying it aloud. I lowered my eyes to the table. My glass of water was still untouched. I picked it up simply to give my hand something to do. Across the room, Vanessa was greeting guests as if nothing unusual had happened. She looked relaxed, comfortable. People hugged her, complimented the speech. One guest even patted Ethan on the shoulder before walking away. I couldn't hear the conversation. I didn't need to. I looked at my son. He finally looked back. For just a second. Our eyes met across the ballroom. I waited. I honestly believed he would come over, smile, and say something simple. Mom, don't read into that. Or maybe, she wasn't talking about you. Anything. Even one sentence. Instead, he hesitated. He looked toward Vanessa. She said something quietly. He nodded once. Then he started walking toward me. Every step seemed slower than the last. When he reached the table, he gave me a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hey, Mom." "Hi." Neither of us knew what to say. Around us, guests continued talking. Servers refilled drinks, and music floated through the ballroom. The reception carried on as though nothing had happened. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "You okay?" I forced a smile. "I'm fine." It wasn't even a lie. I wasn't angry. I was confused, more than anything else. "I liked your ceremony," I said quietly. "It was beautiful." "Thanks." Another silence settled between us. I wanted him to bring up the speech. I wanted him to explain. I wanted him to tell me I had misunderstood. Instead, he glanced over his shoulder toward the head table. Vanessa was already looking in our direction. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was simply waiting. Ethan noticed. Then he looked back at me. "I know today has been busy." "It has. And I know some things probably felt different." I nodded. "Weddings are complicated." He let out a small breath, almost relieved that I hadn't challenged him. For one hopeful second, I thought we were about to have the conversation we'd both been avoiding for months. Instead, he spoke even more softly. He paused. "I don't want any misunderstandings today." "There won't be." "I know." He looked down at the wrapped gift beside my chair. "Is that for us?" "It is." "I can't wait to open it." His smile returned for a brief moment. It reminded me of the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. Then it disappeared just as quickly. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. I could see he was uncomfortable, not angry, not cruel, just trying to solve a problem. And somehow, I had become the problem. He leaned closer so no one else could hear. "Mom." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I think everyone's emotions are running pretty high today." I waited. "So." Another pause. He swallowed before finishing the sentence. "Maybe it's better if you head home." I looked at Ethan for a few seconds. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. The music was still playing. Guests were laughing again. Waiters carried trays across the ballroom as if nothing had happened. I nodded once. "Okay." He looked relieved. "I'm sorry, Mom." "I know." I stood up, picked up my purse, and reached for the wrapped gift beside my chair. For a second, Ethan looked at it. "Aren't you leaving that?" I shook my head. "I'll hold on to it for now." He didn't argue. He gave me a quick hug, the kind people exchange when they're already thinking about the next thing they need to do. Then he walked back toward the head table. I walked out of the ballroom without saying goodbye to anyone else. The cool, evening air hit my face as the doors closed behind me. The parking lot was almost empty. I sat in my car with both hands resting on the steering wheel. I expected to cry. I expected to be angry. Instead, there was nothing. Just silence. A kind of silence I had never experienced before. Not numbness, not shock. Just the absence of excuses. For years, every uncomfortable moment had come with an explanation. "He's stressed. They're busy. They're young." They didn't mean it. Sitting alone in that parking lot, I realized I had finally run out of explanations. When I got home, I carried the gift inside and placed it carefully on the dining room table. I didn't unwrap it. I didn't throw it away. I simply looked at it for a long moment before walking to my home office. The bottom drawer of my filing cabinet slid open. Everything was exactly where I'd left it. The loan agreement Ethan had signed years earlier. The mortgage paperwork for the townhouse. Receipts. Bank transfers. Wedding invoices. Every document neatly labeled in folders. I spent hours reading through them. Not because I was looking for mistakes. Because, for the first time, I wanted to see the full picture. I had spent years protecting Ethan's future. College, medical bills, Car repairs, housing, the wedding. None of it had bothered me. I had given those things willingly. What I hadn't noticed was how easily I had stopped protecting something else. My own dignity. The following morning, I called my attorney. I need to review every financial agreement that's currently active. He asked if something had happened. I answered honestly. Nothing illegal. Just enough. Over the next 2 weeks, everything quietly returned to what had always been written in black and white. The townhouse rent was adjusted to match the lease. Loan repayments resumed according to the original agreement. The extra financial support stopped. There were no dramatic announcements, no angry social media posts, no long emails, just paperwork. Months passed before Ethan knocked on my front door. He looked tired, older somehow. We sat in the living room with 2 untouched cups of coffee between us. "I miss how things used to be," he said. "So do I." He nodded slowly. Then he took a breath. "Vanessa thinks if you apologized for leaving the wedding the way you did, we could move forward." I looked at him. "I left because you asked me to." "I know. And now I'm supposed to apologize for it?" He rubbed his forehead. "I just want everyone to get along." "So do I." The room fell quiet. He wasn't a little boy anymore. I couldn't solve this by writing another check. I reached across the coffee table and rested my hand over his for just a moment. "I love you, Ethan. I love you too. That hasn't changed." He looked hopeful. Then I continued. "But I can't keep participating in a relationship where I'm only valuable when I'm giving something." His shoulders dropped. I could see he wanted to argue. Instead, he simply whispered, "I didn't realize that's how you felt." "I know." And I believed him. That was the saddest part. I walked him to the front door. He hugged me before stepping outside. "I'll call you." "I hope you do." He stood there for another second, then walked down the driveway without looking back. I closed the door gently. The house was quiet. 8 years earlier, after my husband died, that silence had felt unbearable. It reminded me of everything I had lost. This time, it felt different. The silence wasn't empty. It had boundaries. It had self-respect. It had peace. I still loved my son. I probably always would. But that night taught me something I couldn't unlearn. Stopping the financial help didn't cost me my son. What I lost at that wedding was the belief that money could keep a family together. If you've ever been in a relationship where your generosity slowly became an expectation instead of a gift, I'd genuinely like to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in my place?